I am Dr. Marianne Cole, 62 years old, head of the rehabilitation ward at St. C. Quita. Dempsey's Care Center. I've spent 3 decades teaching people how to walk again after life has taken something from them. But that morning, I forgot how to breathe. The new nurse arrived just after sunrise. Evelyn Hart, mid-20s, hair the color of burnt honey, a silver drop-shaped pendant resting against her collarbone. She moved carefully, like someone afraid to disturb the air. When she stepped into my office, she paused, staring at me with a look I've only seen on relatives of dying patients, half wonder, half disbelief. "Dr. Cole," she said softly, "have we met before?" Her voice trembled, as if the question itself hurt. I smiled the professional smile I practiced for years. "I don't think so. I rarely forget a face." But as she leaned down to pick up a chart that had slipped from my desk, the light from the window caught her wrist. There it was. A pale crescent-shaped scar, the size of a thumbnail, sitting just above the vein. My mouth went dry. That scar. I had seen it once. On the wrist of my daughter Grace, the child who was stolen from me 27 years ago, the night the hospital lost power. I forced my hands to stay still on the desk, though my fingertips had already gone numb. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old roses, the scent they used in the dementia wing. For a second, I thought I was going to faint, and the absurdity of that, a doctor passing out in her own ward, almost made me laugh. Evelyn didn't notice. She was adjusting the blood pressure cuff on an elderly patient, humming under her breath. A simple melody, 2 rising notes, 1 falling. It was the same lullaby I used to hum over Grace's incubator the night before she disappeared. I turned toward the window, pretending to check the morning light. My reflection stared back. White coat, graying hair, face drawn tight. Behind me, in the glass, Evelyn's silhouette overlapped with mine. Same height, same slant of shoulder. For a heartbeat, I saw 2 versions of myself, decades apart, occupying the same space. "Are you all right, Dr. Provenation? Cole?" she asked. "Fine," I lied. "It's just warm in here." My pulse pounded so loudly, I almost didn't hear what she said next. "My full name's Evelyn Grace Hart. But people just call me Eve." The pen slipped from my fingers, hit the floor, and rolled under the cabinet. I didn't move. The word Grace echoed inside me like a struck bell. That was the name I had engraved on a tiny silver identification bracelet, the one they clasped on her wrist in the neonatal unit. The one they told me was lost with her body. I remember carving each letter myself, with shaking hands and a scalpel, the night she was born premature. Grace. Now the name had returned, spoken by a stranger standing 3 feet away, wearing the same scar, the same eyes. Storm gray with a fleck of amber near the iris. For a moment, the whole ward dissolved. The beeping monitors, the smell of bleach, the shuffling nurses. There was only the sound of her breathing, and the question rising in my throat. The question I didn't dare ask. "Who are you, Evelyn Grace Hart? And what have you come to return to me?" Boston, winter 1998. I was 25, a medical resident barely surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. My life was a cycle of white walls, code blues, and the endless smell of disinfectant that clung to my hair even after a shower. The night my daughter was born, a storm tore through the city. Power lines went down across the river. The hospital generator flickered like a failing heartbeat. I remember gripping the metal rails of the delivery bed, the room plunged into half-darkness, the monitors blinking red like dying stars. Someone shouted for a backup light. Another voice said, "She's early, we need the incubator now." And then, the sound that split me open, a single thin cry. I saw her for only seconds. Small as my 2 hands, wrapped in a towel that looked too large, skin translucent, the faintest trace of gold on her lashes. They placed a tiny silver identification bracelet around her wrist, the kind used for premature infants. I had engraved it myself earlier that week, a superstition I never admitted to anyone. G. Cole. Grace. That was the name I whispered to her when the lights went out completely. The next thing I remember is waking up 12 hours later, IV in my arm, a nurse at my bedside avoiding my eyes. The crib beside me was empty. "Where's my baby?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed me a clipboard. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Cole. The baby didn't make it. Complications from hypoxia." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I signed the form with the same pen I used to sign discharge papers for strangers. For years, I believed it. I believed that my child had died before I even had the chance to be her mother. They told me the body was too fragile for viewing, that it had been cremated with several other unclaimed infants. There was no urn, no proof, just a single number typed on a burial registry, plot 143, infant, female, unknown. I still went there every year, white roses in winter, because they were the only flowers that could stand the frost. After the funeral, I stopped sleeping. My colleagues said grief was natural, that losing a child in medicine was occupational irony. I smiled through every condolence. I threw myself into work, 14-hour shifts, night rounds, endless notes. I founded a small charity, the Grace Foundation, to fund neonatal care for low-income mothers. Every paycheck I earned, I sent half of it there. "For you, Grace," I would whisper to the donation slip. People said I was selfless. They didn't know I was paying penance. I carried one relic of that night, the silver ID bracelet. It had been left on my bedside table, engraved letters faded by the years. G. Cole. I kept it in my coat pocket during every operation, every conference, every lonely Christmas shift. The metal had molded to my thumb. I'd rub it whenever I needed to steady my hands. It wasn't superstition anymore. It was survival. The first few years after the loss blurred together. The move to Vermont, the endless rotations, the quiet apartment that never filled with laughter. I dated once or twice, always ending things before they could begin. "You're afraid of attachment," one man told me. I laughed. "I'm afraid of losing what I attached to." By 40, I had become the woman colleagues came to for advice, but never for comfort. Efficient, controlled, precise. I saved other people's families because I couldn't save my own. Still, there were moments when the mask cracked. Once, during rounds, a young nurse hummed a lullaby, the same tune I'd sung to Grace. I froze so abruptly that a patient asked if I was ill. Another time, a medical student handed me a silver pen with the same dull shine as the bracelet. I couldn't touch it for days. And every year, on the anniversary of her birth, I drove to Greenfield Cemetery, Section C, plot 143. I'd kneel before the unmarked grave and whisper, "I brought white roses again. I don't know if you ever saw real snow, but it's falling today. Maybe that's you, coming home for a while." Then I'd place the bracelet on the stone for a minute, just to let it touch the earth, before taking it back. For 27 years, I built a life around that absence, solid, respectable, sterile. Until she walked in, until Evelyn Hart, with her quiet eyes and that crescent scar, stepped into my ward and into the space Grace used to occupy. The first time I saw her handwriting on a patient chart, something inside me stuttered. The G in her signature curved exactly the same way mine did in my old notes, a loop and a drop of ink that always looked accidental. I told myself it was coincidence. I'd told myself that so many times before. But that night, alone in my office, I took out the bracelet from its box and stared at the engraving. The letters were worn smooth from years of touch. I pressed it against my palm until it left a mark. "I made you a promise, didn't I?" I whispered. "If I ever see someone wearing a bracelet like this, I'll ask, 'Who gave it to you?'" Now that moment had come, only I didn't yet know if I wanted the answer. Boston taught me to believe in evidence, not miracles. Yet when Evelyn said her middle name, Grace, logic collapsed. All the years of professionalism, all the protocols, couldn't prepare me for the possibility that the past I buried might still be breathing. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the dead weren't gone. They were simply waiting for us to recognize them. And as I watched her move down the hallway that morning, confident, kind, unknowingly familiar, I realized I was about to break the first rule of medicine. Never reopen a healed wound. Because some wounds, it turns out, were never healed at all. I still remember the weight of her, no heavier than a folded towel, yet somehow heavier than everything I'd carried in my life. They brought her to me just for a minute, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket still warm from the incubator. The oxygen mask covered half her face, and a nurse whispered, "Just be gentle. Doctor." Fragile. That was the first word anyone used for her. Her eyes fluttered open, gray like the sky before rain, and for the briefest heartbeat she smiled. Not the way newborns do. Not a reflex. It was something softer, as if she already knew who I was. I reached out, gloved hands trembling, then tore the gloves off. The skin beneath my fingers was impossibly smooth, warm like steam. Her tiny fingers curled around my thumb with surprising strength. "Grace," I whispered, the name barely forming on my lips. "That's who you are." She blinked, a small sigh escaping her chest, the kind that sounded like a yes. The generator flickered then. The light in the room pulsing, humming, threatening to die. I held her closer, my heart pounding in rhythm with the monitor beside us. "It's okay, sweetheart," I murmured. "You just have to breathe, that's all. You breathe, and I'll do everything else." Her chest rose and fell, each breath a tiny miracle. I counted everyone. I was so afraid to blink and miss a moment of her being alive. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the windowpane. A nurse hurried in to adjust the IV. The power dipped again, and the machines began to wail. "Dr. Cole, we need to move her back to NICU." "Just a minute," I pleaded. "Please, one more minute." They hesitated. Maybe because I was one of them, a doctor, not just another mother losing her first child. I pressed my lips against Grace's forehead. She smelled like milk and antiseptic, and the faint metallic trace of oxygen tubes. "Live," I whispered in my native tongue, words I hadn't spoken since childhood. "Even if I'm gone." Live, even if I'm gone. Her fingers tightened around mine. Once, twice, and then slowly released. That was the last time I felt her skin. For years afterward, I tried to convince myself that those few breaths had been enough, that I'd at least given her something. A name, a promise, a heartbeat that matched mine for a little while. But there are promises that outlive the people who make them. And that sentence, "live, even if I'm gone," became a curse that followed me through every hospital corridor. Every patient I resuscitated carried a piece of her. Every premature infant I touched felt like she might be next to open her eyes and say, "You told me to live." So I did. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to the echo of that monitor beep, the one that had counted her breaths, and I'd wonder if somewhere, somehow, Grace's lungs were still learning the rhythm of life. Now, looking at Evelyn, I understand. Maybe she never stopped. Maybe those words reached her, across darkness, across years, like a signal from one mother to one lost child. And maybe that's why she came back. "You must live, even though I am gone." I never knew those 6 words would become a prophecy. One that would find me 27 years later, standing in front of my daughter, alive, breathing, and not knowing who I am. A week after she joined the ward, Evelyn knocked on my office door between shifts. The sun had already set, the corridors outside glowed pale blue under emergency lights. I was reviewing case notes, trying not to think about her. Failing, as usual. She lingered by the doorway, fingers tapping the metal frame. "Dr. Cole, can I ask you something strange?" I nodded without looking up. In this place, strange is normal. "Did you," she hesitated, searching for words, "ever lose someone named Grace?" The pen slipped in my hand, leaving a dark streak of ink across the page. I looked up. "Why do you ask?" Evelyn's eyes darted to the floor, embarrassed. "We sell for other." A woman in a white coat. Her face was blurred, but she kept calling me Grace. She was holding me, and then she put a silver bracelet on my wrist. When I woke up, I could still feel the weight of it. I forced a smile, one I hoped looked professional. "You're spending too many hours here, that's all. Every nurse dreams about the dead eventually. Occupational hazard." She laughed softly, but there was a question behind her laughter, one I didn't dare invite out. After she left, the air in the room felt heavier. The clock ticked too loudly. and in the reflection of the dark window, I saw my own face, pale, tight. A woman pretending logic could erase the sound of her child's name from someone else's mouth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the oxygen pumps through the wall. Every sound in this building reminded me of breath, the thing I'd once begged my daughter to keep. At 2 a.m., I gave up pretending. I went back to the hospital. The corridors were nearly empty, just the faint echo of wheels from the night shift. I slipped into the staff records room, one I still had keycard access to as department head. The computer screen glowed cold against my face as I typed, Evelyn Hart. Search results. Inges. Hired. 2025. Birth year, 1998. Place of birth. St. Joseph's Hospital, Boston. My hands froze on the keyboard. St. Joseph's. The same hospital where I'd lost Grace. I clicked again, half hoping it was coincidence. The screen flickered, loading her personnel file. Under emergency contact, there was no family listed, only the name of an old foster agency. A hollow sound escaped my throat before I realized it was a laugh. It wasn't amusement, it was panic, trying to find a disguise. Coincidence, I whispered aloud, as if saying it would make it true. Just coincidence. But the more I told myself that, the louder another thought grew. Or maybe not. I printed the page, folded it into my coat pocket. The paper felt hot against my palm, as if holding it too long would burn me. When I stepped back into the hallway, I saw movement at the far end, a figure standing near the patient wing. Evelyn. She was checking vitals, her hair pulled up, the same silver pendant catching the fluorescent light. She turned, saw me, smiled. I can't sleep either, just paperwork, I said. Me too. Sometimes the silence here feels alive, doesn't it? Her words hung in the air. Alive. I watched her disappear into room 12, the same room where, 27 years ago, I'd first held my daughter under flickering lights. I leaned against the wall, my legs unsteady. In my pocket, the printed record crinkled. The proof I wasn't imagining everything. Back in my office, I placed the hospital bracelet on the desk, the one engraved G. Cole. It caught the faint light from the desk lamp, casting a thin silver ring onto the papers. I'd kept it all these years thinking it belonged to the dead. Ow. I wasn't sure anymore. I traced the letters with my finger. The metal was cool, steady, nothing like the tremor in my hand. Who gave it to you, Evelyn? I murmured to the empty room. Who told you your name was Hart? The night outside deepened. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Beep. Pause. Beep. Pause. The sound of a heart that refuses to stop. I sat there until morning, the bracelet between my palms, a file printout beside it, and one question looping endlessly in my head. If she is Grace, what does that make me now? The staff appreciation ceremony was meant to be routine, a formality before the holidays. I'd attended dozens of them over the years, shaking hands, smiling for photos, pretending to care about plaques and name tags. But that evening, the hall felt different. Maybe it was the light. Soft gold spilling from chandeliers, glinting off the polished glasses. Or maybe it was because Evelyn was standing near the front, laughing, radiant in her new white uniform. I had been trying all week not to look at her, yet now she was impossible to ignore. When she raised her hand to tuck her hair behind her ear, something silver flashed at her wrist. Small, circular, familiar. My throat tightened. A baby identification bracelet. Linked. Once, twice. No, not just similar, the same design. Narrow band, twin clasp, and the faint curve of engraving inside the metal. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The director began his speech, words dissolving into static. To our new nurses, your compassion keeps this place alive. Applause. Applause. Cameras clicked. Evelyn stepped onto the stage to receive her certificate, and under the lights, the bracelet gleamed, the same dull silver I had seen 27 years ago. I couldn't help it. My voice broke through the polite chatter. Evelyn. She turned, startled, still smiling. Yes, Dr. Cole. I pointed to her wrist. my voice too calm to be sane. Where did you get that bracelet? A murmur rippled through the crowd. She glanced down, confused, touching it as if seeing it for the first time. This? She said. I've had it as long as I can remember. They told me it was the only thing found with me at the orphanage. And the initials inside? She frowned. There are letters, yes. M. C. Maybe the person who left me? M.C. Marianne Cole. For a moment, the room spun. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I tried to stand, but my hands were shaking. The glass of water in my grip slipped, shattering on the floor. Tiny shards scattered across the tiles, slicing a line across my wrist. A bright bead of blood welled up, exactly where an old circular scar had lived for years. It stung sharply. But what truly burned was the sight of that silver band on her wrist, like a mirror reflecting my own past. Blood and silver, mother and daughter, two scars that had never healed. The room fell silent. People stared, unsure whether to help or stay seated. Dr. Cole, are you all right? Someone called. I'm fine, I heard myself say, voice trembling. Just an accident. But it wasn't an accident. It was recognition. It was the universe cutting the same wound open again. To make sure I understood, Evelyn hurried over, pulling tissues from her pocket. Let me see, she said, kneeling beside me. Her fingers pressed gently around my wrist. Her touch was warm, too familiar. You shouldn't have moved so fast, she murmured. You could have hit an artery. Her tone, half scolding, half tender, made my vision blur. For a second, I wasn't in the hall anymore. I was back in that hospital room, holding Grace, telling her to live. I'm okay, I whispered. She looked up, eyes full of concern. You're shaking. Yes, I said. I think I've been shaking for 27 years. She didn't understand. How could she? The director cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should. But I couldn't stop. My hand reached out before my mind could intervene. Evelyn, I said softly, may I see it? The bracelet. She hesitated, then slid it off and placed it in my palm. The metal was cool, smooth from time and touch. Inside, 2 letters shimmered faintly under the light. M.C. The same engraving style, the same tiny curve of the C that I always made when I carved it by hand. My vision blurred. Wherever this came from, I said hoarsely, hold on to it. It's worth more than you think. Oh, do you know what it means? She asked, voice uncertain. Yes, I whispered, but not yet. When I looked up, everyone was still staring. Colleagues, nurses, the director, frozen mid-applause. The silence felt endless. Then the PA system crackled to life, a faint echo of feedback filling the hall. Someone turned down the lights. I stood, clutching the bracelet, blood drying on my wrist. I'm sorry, I said to no one in particular. It's been a long day. Then I walked out, leaving a trail of crimson dots on the tile. My own. The same shade as the one that had once stained a delivery room floor. Outside, snow was falling. The air tasted of iron and cold. I pressed the bracelet against my skin, right over the fresh cut, and felt it pulse. Not like metal, but like memory. I thought of her dream, the woman in white, calling her Grace. Maybe it hadn't been a dream at all. Maybe memories survive where logic dies. That night, as I cleaned the wound and placed the bracelet beside the old one on my desk, I realized I was holding 2 halves of the same story. One engraved for the mother, one for the child. M.C.G. Cole. The beginning and the end. And somewhere between them, 27 years of silence. I spent the weekend in the hospital archives, surrounded by dust and fluorescent light. The past has a particular smell. Stale paper, mold, and the faint trace of antiseptic that never quite fades. Every folder I touched felt like a grave. I was reopening. I typed in the year again, 1998. Neonatal department. Saint asked. Joseph's Hospital. The database was ancient, glitching with every click. Most names meant nothing to me. physicians long retired, nurses who'd vanished into other states. Until one line appeared. Margaret Hart. Head nurse. Dismissed. 1999. Internal ethics violation. My breath caught. Hart. The same last name as Evelyn. I opened the disciplinary report. The text was blurred from a bad scan, but one phrase stood out in black. Suspected involvement in illegal adoption and infant trafficking. The world seemed to shrink to that sentence. Margaret Hart. The woman who'd held my daughter the night she disappeared. The woman who signed the report of death. The woman who, according to the record, had been quietly fired and never charged. And 27 years later, her daughter bore the same surname. I leaned back in the chair, trembling. The fluorescent light buzzed above me like an insect trapped in glass. Everything I had buried under logic was now crawling back to the surface. "You can't," I whispered to myself. "Lichun, you can't believe this." Not yet. But the thought had already taken root. If Margaret Hart had stolen my baby, if she'd given her a new name, then Evelyn wasn't just a coincidence. She was Grace, hidden in plain sight. That night, I drove home under a sky bruised with clouds. The bracelet sat on the passenger seat beside me, glinting with every passing streetlight. It looked almost alive. Inside my chest, something shifted. It wasn't grief this time. It was resolve. For 27 years, I had been a doctor who followed rules, who believed order could fix chaos. But there are moments when obedience becomes betrayal. And silence, complicity. I unlocked my front door, walked straight to my desk, and began writing. Subject: confidential request for genetic verification recipient. Dr. Alan Peters, Chief of Pathology, St. P. Dempsey's Alan. I need a private comparison. Sample A, myself. Sample B, E. H. Nurse ID 307. Please run mitochondrial DNA. No record in official log. You'll understand later. MC. My fingers hesitated before hitting send. Once the email left, there would be no taking it back. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and pressed the key. The next morning, I arranged it quietly, a routine occupational health screening. Evelyn didn't suspect a thing. She joked about the blood draw, teasing the intern about his trembling hands. "Don't worry," she said, smiling. "I've been poked by worse." The line hit me like a wave. So had I. As she left the lab, she waved at me through the glass. "You okay, Dr. Cole? You look pale." "Just tired," I replied. But what I wanted to say was, "You have no idea how close you are to me." That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The clock hands dragged, the house groaned with winter wind. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope containing her personnel record, unable to open it again. In medicine, we're trained to face truth with precision. But this wasn't science. It was resurrection. I thought of the night Grace was born. The storm, the blackout, the voice saying, "Complications." I thought of Margaret Hart, calmly handing me the clipboard to sign my daughter's death. I remembered her eyes. Green. Sharp. A little too calm, she had said. She's at peace now. Now I wondered, did she mean peace for my child, or for herself? The longer I sat there, the more the walls seemed to close in. Every object in the room looked like evidence. The framed degree on the wall, the stethoscope on the table, the tiny crack on the mug I'd used for 20 years. All of it built from the same lie, that I had survived losing Grace. I hadn't. I had simply been waiting to find her again. The following day, I stood by the pathology lab door, pretending to check charts while Alan processed the samples. He didn't look at me when he said quietly, "You'll have results in 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days that might rewrite 27 years. I nodded, forcing calm. "Thank you. And Alan, keep this between us." He gave a slow, uneasy nod. "Of course." That evening, I took a walk around the hospital grounds. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and antiseptic. The lights from the upper floors glowed like a constellation I couldn't name. Inside one of those rooms, Evelyn was probably finishing her rounds, checking vitals, laughing with the patients. She had no idea that the woman watching from the courtyard was about to break every rule in the book for her. At home, I sat at my desk again, staring at the two bracelets lying side by side. The old one, G. Cole. A new one, MC. Mother. Child. Beginning. End. The circle complete. If I had the courage to face it. I held them in my hands until the edges left faint red marks on my palms. If the test is right, I whispered, then I'm not just her mother. I'm the woman who handed her to the thief. The doctor who signed her death. The thought crushed the air out of me. But another voice, steadier, older, rose beneath the panic. If you can heal strangers, you can fight for your own blood. That was the moment something inside me hardened into purpose. I wasn't just reopening the past, I was reclaiming it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel fragile. I felt awake. And as I locked the bracelets away in the drawer and switched off the lamp, one thought pulsed in the dark like a heartbeat refusing to die. The truth has already survived 27 years. It can survive 48 hours more. The days that followed felt both ordinary and unbearable. I arrived at the hospital at 7 a.m., made my rounds, signed reports, scolded interns, attended briefings. I spoke with the same precision I always had, but every word felt like it came from someone else's mouth. Evelyn worked the same shift. She greeted me each morning with that light, unguarded smile. "Good morning, Dr. Cole." I nodded. "Morning, Nurse Hart." To anyone else, we were simply two professionals, mentor and junior. But inside me, there was a split I couldn't mend. Half of me, the doctor supervising her. Half of me, the mother watching her from the wrong side of time. Every movement she made replayed the past. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear. The way she bit her lower lip when thinking. Even the rhythm of her handwriting on patient charts. I started to wonder if memory could hide inside muscle. The hospital hummed with its usual life. Monitors beeping, stretchers rolling, the faint murmur of visitors. But for me, every sound was a countdown. 48 hours. That was how long the DNA results would take. I tried to distract myself by teaching a group of new residents. I lectured on post-stroke rehabilitation, pointing at slides of nerve pathways, my voice detached, automatic. When I looked up, Evelyn had slipped quietly into the back of the room, listening. Her eyes met mine. I lost my train of thought. "So are you all right?" "Doctor Cole?" one resident asked. "Yes," I said too quickly. "Just tired." But it wasn't exhaustion. It was the weight of 2 decades pressing on my ribs. That afternoon, she found me in the break room. The light was dim, filtered through frosted glass. She carried 2 paper cups of coffee and set one in front of me. "Thought you might need this," she said. "Thank you." Silence, only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then she asked, quietly, as if afraid the air might shatter. "Dr. Cole, do you ever feel like someone belongs to you even if you've never held them?" I looked up. My throat ached. She was staring into her coffee, not at me. I could tell she wasn't sure why she'd said it. "Yes," I said slowly, "and sometimes I wish I'd never found them again." She frowned slightly, not understanding. "Why?" I swallowed hard. "Because some returns cost more than the loss ever did." He didn't press further. She only nodded, thoughtful, as if she understood more than she should. That evening, I sat alone in my office, pretending to review files. The bracelet gleamed faintly from the drawer, whispering like a pulse. Outside, I could hear Evelyn laughing with the night shift nurses. Her laughter was bright, and it hurt. Every time she said my name, I felt the words collide against the name she didn't know she should be using. Mother. Around midnight, Alan from pathology sent a short message. "Results ready. Need to speak in person." I stared at the screen for a long time, unable to move. When I finally stepped into the corridor, the hospital was hushed, half asleep. The air smelled faintly of detergent and winter rain through the vents. My footsteps echoed. I stopped by the nursery ward on instinct. Behind the glass, a row of incubators glowed softly in the dark, tiny lives floating in amber light. For a moment, I saw my own reflection superimposed over them, older, hollow-eyed, and behind it, a faint image of a younger woman holding a newborn. You told her to live, I whispered to the ghost in the glass. Now she has. Are you ready for that? Back in the staff lounge, Evelyn had fallen asleep on the couch, still in her uniform. Her hair spilled across the cushion, her breathing even and deep. I stood there for a long time, afraid to wake her, afraid not to. Her wrist rested near the edge of the couch. Bare now, the bracelet lying beside her like a tiny moon. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my fingers. The initials shimmered under the lamp, MC. It struck me that the metal was unscarred, untouched by time, unlike me. You don't know it yet, I murmured, but every breath you've taken has been a message sent back to me. I placed the bracelet gently beside her hand. She stirred, half asleep. Dr. Cole? Shh, go back to sleep, I whispered. You're safe. Her eyes fluttered closed again. I watched her for another minute, just long enough to memorize the curve of her face, before I left. When I stepped outside, the first snow of the season was falling. It drifted onto my coat, melting on contact. I tilted my face upward and let the cold sting my skin awake. Somewhere inside the building behind me, the lab held an envelope that could collapse or resurrect my entire life. But in that brief moment, under the falling snow, I wasn't afraid. Because whether the test said yes or no, one truth had already arrived. She was mine, by blood or by the miracle of recognition. And tomorrow, the storm would begin. The email came at 6:47 p.m. Subject: confidential DNA verification. Complete. I stared at the subject line for nearly a minute before I could click. My fingers refused to obey. When the screen finally loaded, the words swam before my eyes. Miss Haptervis. 99.97%. No room for coincidence. That's no space for denial. Evelyn Hart was Grace Cole, my daughter. I don't remember how I spent the next few hours. I know only that I was breathing, moving, existing in a strange kind of silence, the kind that comes before a scream. By 9:45, I'd already decided. I texted her, "Meet me in the conference room at 10. We need to talk, just us." He replied instantly, "Yes, Dr. Cole. Is everything okay?" Acknowledging. I stared at the message. Dr. Cole. Still formal. Still distant. "It will be," I typed back. "Soon." The conference room was empty when I arrived. The window blinds were half drawn, slicing the darkness into gray bands of light. The air smelled faintly of coffee and sanitizer. Familiar, sterile, safe. I placed the sealed envelope on the table. My hands trembled so badly I had to press them flat to steady them. At 10 noun sharp, Evelyn entered. Her hair was damp from the rain, cheeks flushed. "Kitty," she smiled nervously. "You wanted to see me, Dr. Cole?" "Yes." I gestured to the chair opposite mine. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just looked at her. Every line of her face, every blink, every habit that was mine reborn. "Evelyn," I said quietly, "you don't need to call me doctors anymore." She frowned. "I don't understand." "Because," I whispered, sliding the envelope across the table, "I'm not just your supervisor." "Then who are you?" I met her eyes. The same gray, the same storm. The clock ticked twice. Then she laughed, sharp, startled, almost cruel in its disbelief. "That's not funny." "It isn't." Her laughter broke into a choked sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. "My mother is dead. Margaret Hart. She died when I was 8. "No," I said. "She didn't die." She lied. "She took you from me. From St. Joseph's. I have proof." I pushed the envelope closer. "You didn't touch it." "You're saying what? You kidnapped me?" "That I'm Grace," I said softly. "Your name was Grace." Her breath hitched. Her hand trembled toward the envelope, hesitated, then snatched it open. She scanned the pages, lips moving silently through the percentages, the signatures. When she looked up, her eyes were wet but burning. "If that's true," she whispered, "then why? Why did you let me grow up alone? Why didn't you find me?" I felt the tears before I realized I was crying. Because, Evelyn, I thought you were dead. I buried a coffin without a body. They told me you stopped breathing in the night. I signed the paper. I lived with that paper for 27 years. You were a doctor, she snapped, voice cracking. How could you believe them? Because I trusted them, I said, the words breaking apart. I trusted the woman who stole you. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her shoulders trembled, her fingers clenched around the test results until the paper wrinkled. Finally, she looked at me. Not as a stranger, but as someone seeing the outline of something she'd longed for and feared at once. You're saying Margaret Hart lied about everything. Yes. She falsified your records. She was under investigation for child trafficking, but left before they could charge her. She disappeared. With you. And you waited 27 years to find out? No, I said quietly. I waited 27 years to stop pretending you were gone. She stood abruptly, pacing the small room. Her hands moved through her hair. Her breathing quickened. Do you know what it's like? She said, voice trembling. To grow up not knowing who you are? Every foster home, every file stamped abandoned. And now you tell me it was all, what a mistake. Not a mistake, I said. A crime. She turned to me, eyes shining with anger and something far worse, pity. Then where were you, Mother? She spat the word like a wound. When I was freezing in those homes. When I cried for someone who never came. I was surviving the lie they made me live, I said. I was raising ghosts, not children. She shook her head. You don't get to use grief as an excuse. No, I said, quietly but firmly. I'm not excusing it. I'm owning it. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the lights seemed louder. She sank back into the chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't move closer. I didn't dare. So what now? She asked hoarsely. You show me papers and I'm supposed to just, what? Told her calling you Mom? No, I said. You don't owe me that. You don't owe me anything. I slid a photograph across the table. An old, faded Polaroid of a newborn, tiny hand gripping a thumb. But you deserve to know where you came from. She stared at the photo for a long time. Her thumb brushed the image, then stopped at the small scar on her own wrist, the same place where the baby's bracelet once sat. You kept this, she whispered. Tony's eyed. It was all I had left of you. A sob tore from her throat, sudden and sharp. She pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide as if trying to hold the sound in. Then she looked at me again. And this time, the fury had drained away, leaving only exhaustion. You know what's strange, she said quietly. All my life, I dreamed of a woman in white. I thought she was my mother. She smelled like hospital soap. I used to wake up crying because I couldn't see her face. It was me, I said, my voice breaking. It was me holding you. You remember? She nodded slowly. Maybe I do. We sat there for what felt like hours, two women stitched together by blood and silence. Finally, I said, I understand if you need time, if you hate me. But please, don't hate yourself for surviving. She gave a small, bitter laugh. You sound like my therapist. Maybe I'm just a mother trying to sound like one, I said. That almost made her smile. Almost. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. What was my name again? She asked without turning. Grace Cole. She nodded once, as if memorizing it. Then maybe I'll try it on, she said softly. See if it fits. Then she was gone. After she left, I stayed in the room, staring at the empty chair she'd occupied. Her half-finished cup of coffee still steamed faintly. On the table lay the DNA report, the photo, and two bracelets. One engraved M. Quat, C, the other G. Cole. For the first time, they were side by side. I placed them together, linking the clasps so that they formed a circle. She's alive, I whispered to the silence. That's enough for now. But the truth had already escaped the room. By morning, everyone in the hospital would know. The calm was over. And the storm was just beginning. Rumors travel faster than medicine. By Monday morning, They were already echoing through every corridor of St. Sain. Dempsey's. Did you hear? Dr. Cole claims the new nurse is her daughter. I heard it's about inheritance. She's leaving her estate to a stranger. Or maybe she's losing it. She's too old for another scandal. No one said it to my face, of course. They just lowered their voices when I passed, whispering behind clipboards, pretending to check charts. By noon, the first headline appeared on a local health blog. Renowned physician's bizarre claim. She's my long-lost daughter. By evening, the story had been picked up by a regional paper. Dr. Marianne Cole, respected healer or desperate mythmaker. The article quoted an unnamed staff source. It's sad. She's been under pressure for years. Maybe the stress finally broke her. My name sat there in black print, surrounded by words like unstable, fabricated, attention-seeking. I closed the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in the trash. Then I washed my hands 3 times, though the ink still seemed to cling to my skin. 2 days later, someone uploaded forged documents online. Bank transfers, false signatures, fabricated reports suggesting I had diverted funds from the Grace Foundation into personal accounts. Within hours, the hospital's board summoned me. They didn't accuse me outright. They didn't have to. Their eyes did it for them. The chairman, Dr. Henderson, cleared his throat. Marianne, you understand how delicate this situation is. We're receiving calls from donors. From the press. So you're suspending me. He hesitated. Temporarily, until the matter is clarified. And Evelyn? A pause. Then, carefully, she's been placed on administrative leave. To protect her from unwanted attention. Protect. Such a gentle word for exile. When I found her outside the HR office, she was sitting on the stairs, head in her hands. The air smelled of rain and panic. They said I need to stay home until it's over, she murmured. The patients are asking questions. That I'm a scandal. I'll fix this, I said. How? Everyone thinks you've gone mad and I'm the proof. She looked up at me, eyes red from crying. Was this your plan? To tell everyone? To make me a project for your guilt? No, I said quietly. I wanted to tell you the truth. The rest destroyed my job. Her words cut cleanly. I had no answer. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen, the only light coming from the refrigerator I hadn't opened in 2 days. The headlines kept replaying in my mind. Fraud, fabrication, fake mother. On the table, 2 bracelets glinted in the half-light. I thought of throwing them away, but couldn't. They were the only proof that anything in my life had ever been real. At 2 a.m., a message arrived from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some stories should stay buried. No signature. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I typed back. Slowly. Some stories were buried with the wrong name. I never received a reply. The next morning, the hospital issued an official statement. Dr. Marianne Cole has taken voluntary leave amid allegations concerning financial irregularities. The institution maintains full transparency and confidence in ongoing investigations. Voluntary. Another gentle lie. I was escorted out of my own office by security men I had once treated for back injuries. One of them avoided my gaze, murmuring, "I'm sorry, ma'am." In the hallway, the sound of my heels on tile echoed like heartbeats in an empty chest. When the elevator doors closed, I saw my reflection. Hair unkempt, eyes hollow, white coat wrinkled from the night before. For a moment, I looked exactly like the kind of woman the papers described. Frantic, delusional, dangerous to her own legacy. Oh. Outside, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions that blurred into one long, merciless noise. Dr. Cole, is it true you invented a daughter to cover up embezzlement? Are you seeking sympathy before retirement? Who is Evelyn Hart really? Flashes exploded in my eyes. I said nothing. Silence was the only armor I had left. A hand caught my elbow. Evelyn. She had come anyway? Get in, she said, opening her car door. Ely drove without speaking. The rain came down hard, blurring the city into streaks of silver. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. They showed up at my apartment too. reporters. I didn't even open the door. I'm sorry, I said. Don't apologize. Just tell me it's true. I turned to her. The DNA doesn't lie. She nodded slowly, gripping the wheel. Then we'll find whoever did this. It was the first time she said, we. But the attacks didn't stop. Anonymous emails flooded the hospital board, accusing me of falsifying medical records, of manipulating staff, of having a history of mental instability. Someone even doctored a psychiatric evaluation from decades earlier, attaching my signature beneath a note that read, obsessive grief tendencies. I could almost admire their precision. Every lie carried a seed of truth, enough to bloom into doubt. By the end of the week, donations to the Grace Foundation froze. Suppliers withdrew contracts. Patients' families requested transfers. And through it all, I kept hearing her question from that night. If you're my mother, why did you let me live as an orphan? It followed me like an echo through every empty hallway. I met Alan, the pathologist who'd run the test at a small diner outside town. He looked older than I remembered. I didn't leak it, he said before I could ask. But someone hacked the internal server. Out. Who? He slid a file across the table. Inside were security logs showing repeated access from one account. Mahat retired Steshasefs. Org. Margaret Hart. The name I hadn't spoken aloud since that night, 27 years ago. She's alive, I whispered. Apparently, Alan said. When? And she's watching. That night, I returned to the hospital one last time. It does neat my badge still worked. The halls were quiet. I went to my office, opened the safe behind the bookshelf, and pulled out the only remaining original ledger from the Grace Foundation. Handwritten entries, receipts, signatures. Proof that every dollar had gone to neonatal care. Proof that I wasn't the thief they claimed. When I turned, Evelyn was in the doorway. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you. She stepped inside, rain dripping from her coat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. Margaret, her face, her voice. You remember her? Pieces. She used to say, Grace isn't your name anymore. She said it like a curse. I closed the ledger. Then it's time we give the name back to who it belongs. How? By finding her. Outside, thunder rolled, the same sound that had filled the night of her birth. We stood there in silence, mother and daughter framed by lightning through the glass. The institution that had defined my life was now turning against me, but in that moment it no longer mattered. Because I had finally learned the difference between reputation and truth. Reputation can be stolen. Truth refuses to die. Tears, all the vows I had sworn all along in one sentence. I've buried a child, I said. My voice was calm, but each syllable trembled. I won't bury another truth. My words were like a stone thrown into a pond. It split the water. He was silent, stubbornly clinging to his interests, but in that silence I saw the calculation. There would be money, there would be lawyers, there would be pressure. Are you threatening me? I asked. No, he answered dryly. I'm just giving advice. Your advice is to keep the guilty man quiet, so he can continue to harm others. He stood up, backing toward the door. Be careful, Marianne. There are things he doesn't want to reveal. There are people who will defend their past in any way. I wasn't afraid of the threat. I'd lived with fear for a long time. It no longer had power over me. I'd lost a child once. Nothing would make me bury it again. If you continue to hide it, I will give this entire file to the law and the press. I will not bury the truth anymore. He looked at me one more time, then left. His footsteps tapped on the tile floor like the rhythm of a slow sentence. Leaving the room, I felt tired but lighter. The messy picture on the paper wall. The evidence. It was no longer fragments. It was a story with a name, a criminal, a victim. Evelyn stood in the hallway, looking at me with a mixture of fear and determination. I pulled her into a small corner, put my hand on her shoulder. Get ready, I whispered. Onyuma, they will strike back. She took my hand, warm and firm. 3 strike back. And for the first time since she had come into my life, I believed the truth would not be buried again. When you decide to bring down a wall, you don't start with rage. You start with order. Every detail must be perfect. Because the truth, unlike lies, doesn't scream. It stands very still. I spent the next week working with the investigative unit from Boston PD. 2 detectives came to my house. One young, one grizzled. Both careful, both skeptical. They spread my evidence across the kitchen table like a puzzle. The silver identification bracelet, the forged birth certificate, the neonatal logbook from 1998 with the line that changed everything. Infant transferred to M. Authorization, R. Lang. The older detective, a man named Callahan, leaned back and said quietly, "You understand what this means, Dr. Khan?" "Cole? You're accusing your former hospital board of child trafficking." "No," I said. "I'm proving it." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then we'll need witnesses. People who were there. I have them. They're scared, but they remember." And I did. Joan, the retired nurse who'd seen Margaret carry a newborn out of the NICU. Alan, who'd risked his career to save the data. Elena, the lawyer who had built a legal chain tight enough to hold a hurricane. Still, every time I looked at those papers, my hands shook. Not from fear. From the strange, cold knowledge that justice was no longer an idea. It was a plan. Evelyn came to see me the night before the press conference. She had been reinstated for the investigation, but her uniform looked heavier on her shoulders, as if the white fabric now carried the weight of 2 lives. She stood by the window, arms crossed. "They're saying this is suicide, you know? That you'll ruin what's left of your reputation." "Reputation doesn't heal anything," I said. "Truth does." "And what if the truth destroys us both?" I turned to her, slid a folder across the table. Inside were the photocopies. The false certificate, the DNA report, the shift log. On top of them lay the bracelet. The one engraved G. Cole. "If you don't believe me," I said, "take these. Go to the police. Go to the press. Tell them yourself." "You're giving this to me?" She whispered. "I'm giving you what they stole from you, your name." She looked down, tracing her thumb over the engraving. "You still call me Grace. Because that's who you were before the world decided otherwise." She blinked quickly, trying to hide the tears that had already fallen. "What do you want from me then? Forgiveness?" "No," I said softly. "I don't need to be forgiven. I just need you to be free." That night, we went over every detail for the conference. Elena rehearsed the statement with me. The timeline, the evidence chain, the list of names we would expose. Evelyn sat quietly in the corner, listening, her presence both anchor and wound. When we finished, she said, "You're not doing this just for me, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it for every child whose file says unclaimed. For every mother who buried an empty coffin." She nodded once. "Then I'll stand beside you." For the first time, she called me Mom. Not in words, but in the way she looked at me. The morning of the press conference, I dressed not in my white coat, but in a plain gray suit. Doctors wear coats to shield themselves from mistakes. I wanted no shield. The room was packed. Reporters, cameras, board representatives, former staff. Detective Callahan stood near the back, arms folded, ready. Evelyn sat in the front row, pale but steady. The hospital banner behind me gleamed in the light. Saint Dempsey's, healing through honor. For a moment, I almost laughed at the irony. I stepped up to the podium. The microphone crackled. Every instinct in me wanted to speak clinically, to report facts. But this wasn't medicine anymore. It was surgery of a different kind. Cutting open the lie that had fed on us all. 27 years ago, I began, a premature infant named Grace Cole disappeared from St. Cyr, Joseph's Hospital. Her death was recorded. Her body was never seen. Tonight, I am here to say she lived, and to prove who took her. Gasps, murmurs, flashes. I unfolded the documents one by one. The birth record, the falsified transfer order, the DNA confirmation. "This is the bracelet she wore that night," I said, holding it up. "And this," I gestured toward Evelyn, "is the woman she became. Evelyn rose slowly. For a second, I saw the same expression she'd worn that first day: confusion, awe, fear. Then she steadied herself. "My name," she said into the microphone, her voice shaking but clear, "is Evelyn Grace Cole. I was told my mother died. She didn't. She's standing right here." The room exploded, reporters shouting, flashes blinding. Behind them, I saw R, Lang and the remaining board members stiffen, exchanging frantic whispers. Callahan moved forward, handing a sealed evidence box to a uniformed officer. The chain of command had begun. When the chaos settled, I stepped away from the podium. Evelyn reached for my hand. "Whatever happens next," she whispered, "we'll face it together." "Yes," I said. "But if they turn on us again, if they try to bury this, promise me you won't stop." She squeezed my fingers. "I won't." I believed her. Because she was her mother's daughter. The kind of woman who had learned to breathe through fire. That night, the hospital lights stayed on long after closing. Police cars lined the driveway. Reporters camped outside the gate. For the first time in decades, the truth wasn't a ghost story whispered behind closed doors. It had a name, a face, a voice. I went home, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall. The bracelets lay side by side on the table, their clasps finally linked together. For 27 years, I'd carried silence like a second heartbeat. Now, at last, it was the world's turn to listen. They called it the Annual Medical Ethics Congress, a title polished enough to hide its rot. I'd attended every year for 2 decades, sitting through speeches about integrity, compassion, trust. Words that meant nothing once you'd seen what they were willing to bury. This year, they invited me as the keynote speaker. Perhaps they thought I would show gratitude, that I would stand there and perform the ritual of respectability. They didn't know I was done performing. The ballroom of the St. D. Regis Hotel glittered with chandeliers and ambition. Doctors, directors, investors, hundreds of them, murmured over canapes and champagne, their badges catching the light like small shields. At the front, a banner stretched across the wall, "Healing through Honor." I stared at that phrase for a long time. Honor. The word they used to suffocate truth. Evelyn stood backstage with me, palms cold, a folder clutched against her chest. Inside were the test results, the police report, and a single photograph. A newborn hand gripping a thumb, mine. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," I said, steady. "I do." When they called my name, polite applause rippled across the hall. I walked to the podium, the click of my heels echoing like a countdown. The first few minutes were exactly what they expected. Slides about rehabilitation statistics, post-trauma therapy, medical ethics and long-term care. I saw the audience relax, their attention drifting to their phones, their wine glasses. Then I reached the slide marked Moral Responsibility in Medicine, the one they had all seen in the program. I'd paused, clicked once. The screen behind me went black. "Today," I said, my voice echoing through the microphone, "I'm not going to speak about ethics." A few heads lifted. Cameras tilted upward. "I'm going to speak about loss." Click. 2 images appeared on the screen. On the left, a silver identification bracelet, engraved G. Cole. On the right, a photograph of Evelyn. A murmur rolled through the room, confusion first, then disbelief. 27 years ago, I said evenly, a premature infant disappeared from St. Joseph's Hospital. Her death was falsified. Your identity stolen, your life sold. Silence, the kind that hums. That child was my daughter. A gasp rippled across the audience. I saw a few journalists lower their glasses, eyes narrowing with the scent of scandal. Others whispered to each other, "Is she serious? Is this the same story from the paper?" For decades, I believed she was dead. But she wasn't. She grew up under another name, a name given by a woman who stole her and a man who protected that theft. I looked down at the front row. Robert Lang sat there, hands folded, face composed. But his eyes flickered like a trapped animal's. "You told me." I said, my gaze fixed on him, that if I exposed this, the institution would fall. That this hospital, this industry, couldn't survive the truth. I took a breath. You were right. Gasps. Murmurs. The sound of glass clinking nervously. But I would rather see this place collapse under honesty than stand one more day on a lie. From the side of the stage, Evelyn stepped forward. The lights caught her hair, turning it to gold. She walked to the podium and stood beside me, trembling but unbroken. Her voice quivered at first, then grew clear. My name is Evelyn Grace Cole. The audience stilled. Even the camera stopped moving. For 27 years, I was told my mother was dead. That I had no name, no family, no past. I am here to say, I was never lost. I was taken. She lifted the DNA report for the cameras. Flashes exploded. The proof is here. The blood is hers. The lies belong to them. The room erupted. Shouts, cries, people standing, others leaving. A dozen journalists surged forward, their recorders thrust out. Robert Lang rose from his seat, face pale, voice strained. This is defamation. She's lying. None of this. You forged the transfer order. I cut in, my voice ringing through the mic. You signed off on the falsified birth certificate. You took donations meant for infants and used them to cover the sale of lives. That's outrageous. Then explain, I snapped, pointing toward the slide that now displayed the ledger we had uncovered. Why your signature appears on every single transaction tied to the Grace Foundation's missing funds. Gasps again. Someone shouted, "Turn it off!" But the technicians didn't move. The detectives were already in the room. The double doors opened. Flashbulbs flared. Detective Callahan stepped forward, followed by two officers. Robert Lang, he said clearly. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and falsification of medical records pending further investigation. The crowd erupted in a frenzy, reporters shouting, attendees craning for photos. Lang's face drained of color. You can't. You have no authority. We have a warrant, Callahan said. And 27 years of silence to answer for. They led him away as the room buzzed with disbelief. For a moment, I simply stood there. Evelyn beside me, the microphone forgotten, the chaos swirling. Then the applause began. Not loud, not triumphant, but slow, heavy, real. It started from the back of the room. One person, then another, until the sound filled the air like rain after drought. Evelyn reached for my hand. I turned to her, and for the first time, I saw something pure in her eyes. Not fear, not pity, but recognition. It's over, she whispered. No, I said. It's beginning. After the press conference, the media swarmed. By dawn, headlines flashed across every screen. Doctor exposes decades. Long baby trafficking network. Mother and daughter reunited after 27 years. The hospital issued statements of denial, of shock, of sorrow. Board members resigned, but the truth had already taken root. It spread faster than any antidote. For once, the noise didn't bother me. For once, I didn't flinch when people said my name. 2 days later, I returned to St. Just. Dempsey's for the last time. The halls were quieter now, emptied of cameras, stripped of authority. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and endings. In my office, the evidence board was gone. Only one thing remained on the desk. The photograph of the newborn hand and the bracelet lying beside it. Evelyn entered silently. She was no longer wearing her nurse's badge. She held out a folded paper, the statement she'd given to the police. It's done, she said. They've found others. Other mothers. Other files. I nodded. Then it wasn't just us. No, she said. But it started with us. We stood there in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of every heartbeat that had ever passed through these walls. Do you regret it? She asked. I looked at her. Really looked, and felt the answer rise, clear and fierce. Never. That evening, we returned to the hotel ballroom. It was empty now. Rows of chairs stacked, the stage dismantled. I walked to the center, where the podium had stood, and touched the floor. You know, I said softly, the first time I spoke here, I thought I was teaching ethics. Turns out, I was learning it. Evelyn smiled faintly. Oh, and what's the lesson? That truth doesn't need applause, I said. It just needs air. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bracelet, now polished, gleaming. Fist it in my palm. Keep it, she said, but don't hide it anymore. I fastened it around my wrist, the metal cool against my skin. The engraving caught the last trace of light through the window. G. Cole. For the first time in 27 years, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a pulse. As we left, the city outside was waking. Snow drifted along the pavement, melting under the first weak light of morning. I thought of Lang's words. If you expose this, the institution will fall. He was right. It had, but from the rubble, something else was growing. Not fame, not redemption, but the smallest, most defiant thing of all. Peace. And as Evelyn walked beside me, the world suddenly felt wide enough to begin again. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines burned across every screen. Hospital scandal shatters legacy. Deputy director arrested in baby trafficking case. Mother and daughter reunited after 27 years. For weeks, my name was everywhere. Dissected, debated, diluted. Called me brave. Others called me unstable. But for the first time, I didn't care what they called me, because Grace had a voice again. Robert Lang was indicted within the month. Margaret Hart's body was never found. Only the remnants of her old house near the Maine border, where the police discovered dozens of falsified adoption records. The hospital board was dissolved, the name Saint. Dempsey's retired for good. People said the institution had fallen. I preferred to think it had finally been emptied of ghosts. Evelyn and I, or Grace, as I'd begun to call her again, left Boston that winter. We moved north, to a small cedar cabin by the edge of Lake Vermont. The water there was cold and clean, the kind of blue that looked honest. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of pine and soap. We kept very few things, only what we could carry without memory dragging behind it. On the wall above the fireplace, we hung the old silver bracelet in a glass frame. Beneath it, I carved a small plaque. Lost once, found true. Sometimes, when the light hit the glass just right, the engraving G. Cole shimmered like it was still being written. We built our days slowly. Every morning, I brewed coffee while she watched the mist lift from the lake. I taught her how to stitch a wound cleanly. Not the kind that bleeds, but the kind that opens in skin when life insists on reminding you it still hurts. Firm hands, I told her. Gentle thread. Healing isn't about hiding the scar, it's about keeping it honest. And every evening, she taught me the opposite. Patience for the world that had moved on without me. Here, she'd laugh, sliding her phone into my hands. Wait, tap this. No, not that, Mom. That's the flashlight. The word mom still startled me every time. Soft, ordinary, yet enough to unmake a lifetime of silence. We didn't talk much about the trial or the years we'd lost. Some wounds, once named, prefer quiet. But sometimes, in small ways, the past visited us, like the morning I found her standing by the lake, sleeves rolled up, watching the water move. Her wrist caught the sunlight, a thin scar, the same crescent shape as mine. Does it still hurt? I asked. She smiled. No. It just reminds me that I survived. Later, as we cleaned up after dinner, she said it out of nowhere. Mom, your scar is beautiful. I looked down at the pale circle on my wrist, the place where blood and glass had once met. It's beautiful, she said again, because that's where our blood finally found each other. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew she was right. By spring, the snow melted, leaving wildflowers sprouting along the edge of the dock. We turned the old boathouse into a small clinic. Grace Revival, named after her, not me. It wasn't grand, but people came. Single mothers, foster children, women who wanted to remember how to begin again. Evelyn handled the younger patients, steady, patient, with that quiet strength I once mistook for fragility. I took care of the older ones, the ones who carried grief like an old coat they couldn't take off. Scars don't vanish, I told them. They just learn new names. And every time I said it, I thought of the two of us. A doctor and a nurse, a mother and a daughter. Stitching a world back together, one careful thread at a time. Sometimes at night, the lake goes perfectly still, like glass. When the wind sleeps, the surface reflects everything. The stars, the house lights, even our shadows. We sit by the window then, and it feels as if the water is giving us our lives back. Not perfect, but mirrored, doubled, whole. Evelyn likes to joke that we live inside a second chance. Yet I suppose she's right. But I've learned not to call it a second life. It's the same one, just lived honestly now. And on certain mornings, when the sun rises and hits that framed bracelet, the whole room glows silver. I stand there, coffee in hand, watching the light flicker over the words, lost once, found true. And for the first time in 27 years, I can say without trembling, we are exactly where we're meant to be. A year passed. Time didn't heal everything, it simply let the pain find a quieter room to live in. The story faded from the headlines. New scandals took its place. People forgot the names, the faces, the statistics. But some truths, once unearthed, refused to go back underground. In the spring, Evelyn and I opened Grace Revival Clinic, a small center by the edge of the same Vermont lake that had kept our secrets through winter. The clinic wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. We had 5 rooms, 10 beds, and a single sign on the front door that Evelyn carved herself. For those who were never meant to be lost. Inside, sunlight filled the halls. The walls were painted the color of new paper, ready to be written on. We treated children who had been abandoned, foster teens who didn't know what home meant, and young nurses who needed both a job and a place to belong. Evelyn oversaw training sessions in the mornings. I handled therapy and supervision in the afternoons. Our patients called her Nurse Grace, though she never introduced herself that way. It simply fit. The name she'd been given by blood, by accident, by love. On the main wall, framed in glass, hung the silver identification bracelet, the first and last piece of metal that ever bound us. When the sun hit it through the high windows, it flashed like a heartbeat. Beneath it, Evelyn hung the small wooden plaque she'd made herself. The letters were uneven, hand burned into the grain. No one is born to be lost. Every morning, I arrive before the staff. I make 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her, and watch the mist rise over the lake. It's the same color as the fog that once haunted the hospital corridors, but now it feels softer, almost kind. Sometimes Evelyn joins me on the porch steps, her hair tied back, her wrist bare. "Mom," she says, "you ever think about what would have happened if we never found each other?" All the time. And then I stop, because we did. She smiles at that. Her smile doesn't carry apology anymore, it carries continuation. In the afternoons, the clinic fills with small noises. The laughter of children, the rustle of books, the hum of the washing machine in the staff room. Every sound is a thread sewing the world back together. Sometimes a young nurse will ask Evelyn how she learned to stay so calm with the little ones who scream or hide under the beds. She always gives the same answer. Because once, I was the one they were trying to calm. And when I overhear that, I step out of sight for a moment, not to cry, but to breathe. Because there is nothing more humbling than watching your child heal others from the wound that nearly ended her. We host workshops on weekends. I teach wound care and trauma response. Evelyn teaches something harder. Trust. During one session, a quiet student raised her hand. She was young, barely 20, eyes hollow from years of bouncing through foster homes. "Dr. Cole," she asked, "do you believe in destiny?" The room went still. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to pause. I smiled, thinking of everything that had led us here. The storm, the lies, the blood, the reunion, the silence that had finally learned to speak. "Yes," I said, "but only when destiny knows the way back." She nodded, and for a moment, I saw recognition, that flicker of hope that lives in people who've been told they were disposable. That night, after the students left, Evelyn and I stayed behind to clean up. The light from the lake spilled through the open door, washing the floor in silver. "You handled that question well," she said, stacking papers. "It's easier now," I admitted. "Talking about things that used to hurt. You think it'll ever stop hurting?" I looked at her. "No. But pain changes shape. It becomes something you can hold without bleeding." She reached for the framed bracelet on the wall, her fingertips grazing the glass. "It's strange," she murmured. "For so long, that thing meant loss to me. Now it feels like proof that even when life forgets you, someone remembers." "That's what memory is for," I said. "It keeps love from disappearing." By late summer, the clinic had its rhythm. We grew vegetables in the back garden for the patients' meals. Evelyn convinced me to get a dog, a rescue mutt with one ear folded down and a habit of following her everywhere. He named him Chance. Some evenings, we take long walks down the path that circles the lake. The air smells of pine and wet earth. Fireflies rise from the grass like sparks. She always walks half a step ahead, turning now and then to make sure I'm keeping up. Once, I teased her, "You're supposed to let your elders lead." She laughed. "Not when they've already led me this far." The local paper did a follow-up story on us months later. The headline read, "From Scandal to Sanctuary. Grace Revival Clinic gives second chances." They took photos. One of Evelyn with the children in the garden, another of me at the desk beneath the framed bracelet. When I saw the printed article, I realized something small but extraordinary. There were no more lies attached to my name. Just work, just truth, just peace. Sometimes I still wake in the night, expecting to hear the old hospital alarms, the mechanical beeping of monitors, the soft cries of newborns. But when I open my eyes, all I see is the slow pulse of moonlight on the wall, and the silhouette of the bracelet glimmering where it hangs. There's no fear in that light anymore. Only the echo of everything we survived. A few weeks ago, Evelyn brought me a new plaque she'd carved for the front gate. The letters are simple, uneven, and perfect. Grace Revival Clinic, built on truth. Kept alive by return. She asked if I liked it. I told her it was more than I could have imagined. Then I added quietly, "Do you know what I wish I could tell the woman I used to be? The one who thought her daughter was gone?" "What?" "That she wasn't broken. She was just waiting for the story to finish its circle." Evelyn leaned her head on my shoulder. "You think stories really finish?" "No," I said. "They just learn how to begin again." The next morning, when I walked through the clinic doors, sunlight was pouring through the glass and scattering across the bracelet's frame. It threw a shimmer across the wall, a quiet silver line between her desk and mine, like a bridge drawn out of light. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the day starting. The laughter, the footsteps, the steady hum of life continuing. Then I picked up the stethoscope that had once only heard loss, and smiled. Because for the first time, every beat sounded exactly as it should. Not an ending, but a return. The camera light blinks red. They tell me it's rolling. I take a breath. It's strange, after everything, to speak not to a courtroom or a crowd, but to one unseen listener somewhere out there, maybe holding a story like mine, and thinking they're the only one left who hasn't healed. I lean forward slightly, hands folded, voice steady. If one day someone walks into your life, and in their eyes, you recognize the piece of yourself that was once stolen, don't run. I let the words settle. It might hurt. It might tear open wounds you thought were already scarred. But maybe they are the reason you're still here. Behind me, sunlight filters through the window of the clinic. You can see the glint of the framed silver bracelet on the wall. Gee. Cole catching the light one last time. I used to believe healing meant forgetting, I continue. Now I know it means remembering, without being afraid to look. There's a pause. The kind of silence that breathes. I spent 27 years searching for a grave that didn't exist. What I found instead was a heartbeat that never stopped waiting for mine. As I glance toward the door, outside, I can hear Evelyn's laughter with the children, the sound that pulled me back from the dark. It's bright, imperfect, alive. I turn back to the camera. If you're watching this, and you've ever been told that something you lost is gone forever, I want you to know, nothing true ever disappears. It just waits for you to stop being afraid to look for it. My throat tightens, but I don't stop. Sometimes, we don't find our children through maps or miracles. Sometimes, we find them through the scars that never fade, the quiet reminders of where blood once met love. I pick up the small wooden plaque Evelyn carved, the one that hangs above the door. The letters are uneven, burned into the wood by her steady hand. No one is born to be lost. That's the heart of this story, I say softly. Not justice, not revenge, just return. The camera operator signals, last minute. I nod, then look straight into the lens, as if meeting the eyes of every person who ever buried a truth too early. Share this story, I whisper. Not for me, for someone who still thinks it's too late. Because sometimes we don't find our children, our mothers, our old selves through directions, but through the scars that still remember where home is. The light behind me shifts, sunset bleeding into the room, painting the bracelet in gold instead of silver. I smile, small but sure. My story ends here, I say. But maybe, just maybe, it's the first pulse of freedom in yours. The camera clicks off. Good red light fades. In that quiet, I swear I can still hear two heartbeats, finally in rhythm.